Afternoon. Thanks very much for coming. You're about ready to hear the highlight of the conference. This is going to be extraordinary. So I'm going to ask them to put up one slide. It's simply an introduction to a person I admire a lot, among the people I admire the most on the planet. So you're going to hear Rhonda Cornum, who is U.S. Army General retired. Her credentials are extraordinary. She's a medical doctor with specialties in surgery and urology. That takes extra work. She's also a Ph.D. from Cornell in biochemistry and nutrition. That takes extra work. She was the command surgeon at the U.S. Army Forces Command, has a number in blue Army ribbons, but it's only one row of many rows. Director of the Landstuhl Hospital complex in Germany. Director for, I think the initial director of the U.S. Army Comprehensive Soldiers Fitness Program, which employs or uses some of what you produce by way of research, and she makes it work. That's the place that helps people who need help badly and makes a big difference in their lives. She currently is a director, as you can see, of health strategy for TechWorks. And what's most important is the Westminster Dog Club had to create a new category for her because she is, I mean, there are some people in some circles who would say she's the best dog trainer in the world. Now, you have a person who's a retired general, PhD, MD, done all these wonderful things, and she's in Kentucky raising dogs. I mean, who does that kind of thing? So she is as inspiring a person as I've ever known, and I'm so grateful that she agreed to come and tell us her story, how we can learn from her. So, Rhonda Cornum.
Thank you very much. All right, the real truth is, as my daughter says, Mother, it means you're old and you went to school a really long time. Just don't make any, don't take any more of that than there is. So I'm going to talk to you about things I learned. And I didn't learn this like in school. I didn't learn this the way we're all trying to teach it now. I was very fortunate. I had parents and grandparents and experiences that gave me most of those qualities and the ability to deploy those qualities when needed. And it's because of that I feel a real obligation that we need to deploy them to everyone else who doesn't know how to do it already. So Kim just gave my life. Let me just talk to you a little bit about this. So yeah, I got my PhD from Cornell, and I got in the Army, and I did research for 4 years, and I thought I was doing really important stuff. I was doing blood amplification. You give them phosphatidylpyruvate, and your red cells are like new again. And then I went to medical school, and that was a little bit of a challenge. And then I was a flight surgeon. Now, that just means you're a doctor who takes care of pilots and flies airplanes. That's pretty fun. And they're basically healthy people. So although you don't know it because you did nothing but surgery in your life, you're really doing psychology. And then I was a urology resident. You're really busy. You're doing surgery for 7 days a week for 5 years. And then I was a staff urologist because you got to practice in order to get the boards. And then I was the commander of the only airborne hospital in the Army at the time. In fact, it still is. And we deployed to Bosnia during that conflict, and we had a great time. And then, 9/11 happened while I was there, and so then we packed up the hospital and deployed it to Afghanistan. And then I came back, and I went to the War College for a year, and it was at the very end of the War College that we invaded Iraq and started that big event. And so I graduated in June and took command of the Landstuhl Hospital in July when the whole thing was supposedly over, at which time we had the highest casualties of the entire war. And we had 26,000 injured and ill soldiers went through that hospital in the 2 years I was there. So then I thought that was the other most important thing I did. And then what did I do? And then I came back and I ran Forces Command, where we sort of had policy for the whole United States-based Army. And then I went off to be a urologist because I thought I'm never going to get promoted, so I'm going to go off and get out of the Army and be a urologist, at which point I got promoted. And then I went to be the Assistant Surgeon General, and then I had the good fortune of the Surgeon General had colitis and perfed his bowel. And that's a good fortune because that meant I got to be the acting Surgeon General frequently. And so I had the opportunity to deal with the Chief of Staff much more than I would have done if I had not been in that position, which is how I ended up being the Director of Comprehensive Soldier Fitness. We did that, and then I left the Army, and here I am. And I really thought, so I thought a lot of things I did were important or whatever, but I gotta tell you, everybody that I know remembers me for that. For 1 week of a misadventure in the Army. So I'm going to talk about that 1 week, not because it impacted my life in any particular emotional way, but because it certainly impacted it in a broad scale, possibly for the Army and maybe the nation. And so how that happened, and then the ramifications of that happening. So I went to the war. As I said, I was a flight surgeon from Fort Rucker. I was the doctor, a flight surgeon for an attack helicopter battalion. So a bunch of Apaches and 1 doctor, 5 medics, and about 390 pilots and maintainers and stuff. So we went off to the war when we were the first. We went with the 101st Airborne Division. We went in August of 1990, right after Saddam and his group invaded Kuwait. We got there, we waited for everybody else to come. That took months, by the way. And by the way, how many people were even alive then? Okay, I just thought I'd ask, you know. You realize when you talk to people graduating, they weren't. You're part of history, and that makes you really feel old. And so my little attack battalion was out in the desert, and then we were moving north through Iraq, and I gotta tell you, we were really successful. We blew up all the stuff we were supposed to blow up. We took pictures of all stuff we're supposed to take pictures of. We captured people. We slung back stuff so that it's now filling up Army museums all over the nation. We were really successful. We didn't lose an aircraft. We didn't lose a guy. We didn't have a midair. We were really good. What I did once we were doing real live combat missions was the Apaches would fly off, they're the guys with the guns, and then my Black Hawk, which is a utility aircraft, would follow the Apaches into battle. We'd be about 1 kilometer or 2 behind them, so that if any one of them had a midair or got shot down or broke, that we would be there to pick up the pilot, because otherwise nobody would be there to get him, and the other Apaches didn't have a place to put him. So one day, and we're really, I mean, the war's been going on for a while, and it's clear to everyone that we're winning overwhelmingly. So we know they've got to call this off soon, or we're going to find ourselves in Baghdad accidentally. So one day, we're just getting gas. And over the radio comes this thing, do you have Doc Cornum on board? And my pilot, Phil Garvey, says, yeah, I got the doc on board. And then he says, do you have all her stuff? You know, because I had stretchers and IV fluid and intubation. I mean, I had all the stuff you would need to do an airplane wreck. He said, yeah, I got all her stuff. He said, good, because there's been an F-16 guy shot down. He's on his radio, he's got a broken leg, and he's about a half an hour from you people, and you're the only unit with helicopters who could possibly get him. Would you go get him? We said, of course we would go get him. What a great mission. So, 2 Apaches and my Black Hawk went whopping off into the desert to get this guy. Now, you always hope. Anybody here been in the Air Force? Okay, you always hope those Air Force people will eject someplace far away from where the guns were. Hope is not a method. This guy ejected right over where they shot him, which was the biggest ammunition supply point in southern Iraq. So he landed right in the middle of this thing. And so as we are getting vectored right to him, the same guys that shot him down shot us down. And there is the biggest piece that was remaining of my poor helicopter. They shot the tail boom off. And they were shooting at it as, with small arms while that was going on. So I got shot. And then we crashed. And we were flying a little bit lower than this ceiling. So there's not a lot of time between when you know you're going in and when you hit. So those people that say, if you're going to die, your whole life flashes in front of your eyes, I just have to tell you, those people started a lot higher than I did. So seriously, so I didn't have my whole life, either that or they have a really short, boring life. I don't know. But I didn't figure I had either of those things. So I only had time for like a thought. And my last thought was, I'm dying. First of all, I'm going to die right here, because I've done a lot of accident investigations in my life by then. And I knew this was going to be an unsurvivable wreck. So I'm going to die right here, and I've really had a great life. And at least I'm dying doing something honorable. And splat. So, splat, I'm dead. So I come to, now I never used to say that because in the Army, if you were lost consciousness, you couldn't get back on flight status. So I used to say next thing I remember. But now that I'm retired, I can say when I came to. But what really, the only next thing I do remember was, it's as if I was floating above this scene and I saw my body lying there underneath this piece of wrecked helicopter, and I thought, wow, I am dead. I'm not sure what I expected, but I don't think this is it. Now, I hadn't given a lot of introspection to that. I can't say I'd ever considered being dead. I figured it would happen whether I thought about it or not. And so I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, And then, you know, the brain starts working better, I guess. And then I said, well, I'm not sure I'm dead. And if I'm not dead, by God, I'm not going to just lie here and die in a post-crash fire. So I'm going to get out from this helicopter wreck. And, you know, if I can't, yeah, I'm probably dead. So I tried, and I got out of, I think I was under a door or something. And I pushed myself under the door, but I couldn't stand up. I couldn't even turn over. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. But whatever it was clear I wasn't dead because me moving had noted, you know, sort of aroused the enemy that I wasn't dead. And so next time I tried to turn over, there were 5 guys with guns pointed right at my head. And I said, oh, not dead. So this is POW 101. And now, being a prisoner of war is, I don't recommend it. I don't even recommend practicing it. But I got to tell you, it's a lot better than being dead. So because I believe always to do that, you look at how bad it could be, not how bad it is. And so it seemed like a pretty good deal to be a prisoner of war because there was no third option. You're either dead, you're a prisoner, or nothing else. So it didn't look so bad. So this one guy reaches down and he stands me up by my right arm, which dislocates my already broken right arm. Now that did hurt really bad, I will say. So he dropped it, and I'm standing there, and I'm looking around. And they take off my flak jacket and my helmet and my gun, and they took my camera, they took my wedding ring. You know, so I'm standing there. And I realize, oh, this is not going well because both arms come out to about here and go down. And they were both broke, and I couldn't feel them, and I couldn't move them. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really gross. You know, because he had a flight suit on, and a flight suit has got Velcro at the sleeve so that if there's a fire, you know, the fire doesn't get up there. It's got Nomex on here. So I said, I can't feel them, can't move them. They're probably severed in the wreck, and as soon as they take the Velcro off, my arms are going to fall out of my sleeves. And I'm not going to tolerate that well, and I'm going to throw up. And there's no cool points to throwing up in front of the enemy. And pride, you know, is an important thing in the Army. So I was trying to decide how am I going to tolerate that until finally the finger started moving. And once again, I was just so grateful that I said, well, it's been hours. I know it's been hours. So if the fingers are moving, that means they're still attached and there's enough blood and enough nerves connecting them that I'm going to get out of here and they're going to get fixed. So once again, my first thought was gratitude when I hit the ground and I wasn't dead, and my second thought was gratitude when my arms weren't, you know, separated from them. Because I'd seen that happen. I'd done surgery a long time, and I'd seen them bring a guy in on the stretcher, legs on one stretcher, him on the other, and that's bad. So I didn't want to be one of them. So they drugged me into a bunker and started interrogating me, and you know, the guy looks at me and in perfect English says, "Who are you?" Well, I look down and it says, Major Rhonda Cornum, right on my shirt. You know, I'm Major Rhonda Cornum. And what are you doing here? You know, you're not supposed to say anything except my name, my rank, and my social security number. I was pretty confident he didn't care about my social security number. And that was before we you know, had all this cybersecurity crap. So I got a wrecked helicopter on his bunker. So I said, I had a helicopter wreck. Now, I didn't tell him, you know, what we were doing. I was hoping very diligently that everybody else had gotten out, or at least the guy we were going to get had gotten away. But I wasn't going to deny that I had a wreck. I mean, that was stupid. Don't piss them off for nothing. So he did the right thing. He sent me to somebody else. And I got interrogated along the way. And finally, I think we're on their way to the last guy. And there's this group of Iraqi soldiers standing in a circle. And they throw me down in front of this group of guys. And of course, now I'm discovering just how badly injured I am. As it turns out, I had a transected anterior cruciate ligament as well. So I have a very unstable leg on one side, one working leg, and 2 broken arms. That's not a good beginning. But that's what you get. So they threw me in there, and I went to my knees. I was happy I didn't fall on my face. And I look up, and there is Sergeant Dunlap. And that was the first time I knew there had been another survivor. I have to say, I was never so happy to see someone. Now, I know that hurt my tender Hubby's feelings when I told him that later, but it was still true. When you're surrounded by only people that hate you and want to kill you, then finding another guy on your side is really good. And it doesn't really matter about the gender and the education and the military occupational specialty. It just matters that you're on the same side. So I was really, really happy to see this guy. And I think he was equally happy to see me. That did not last all that long, because the next thing that happened, this big group of Iraqi guys standing around us take out handguns, which, for all I know, were the ones that they had taken off of us. And they hold them in the back of our heads, and it's like, this is going to be the execution. And I'm thinking, so why did they bother getting me out of the Iraq? Why didn't they shoot me there? So I'm kneeling there with this gun behind my head, and a bunch of guys screaming, yelling, and I'm trying diligently to think of something positive, because, as you will see later, I have some things to live by, and one of them is great people in history are those who can turn a disadvantage into an advantage, and I'm really working to find an advantage in this. And the only thing I came up with at the time was, well, I had time to reflect, so I've appreciated my great life. My daughter's, she was 13 at the time, she's launched and going to be very successful. I had a wonderful career. I wrote a lot of papers, I did most things that I wanted to do. I had shown champion dogs already. I had done a lot of stuff. And so I thought, most people don't get to do that. And if this is the end, then it's been a great life. And once again, the best part was, at least it won't hurt. They're going to get me right in the brainstem, and nothing. I will feel nothing. So that's my last thoughts that I recall. And then the gun goes click, and obviously I'm not dead. So it turns out either they didn't have a bullet, or it was truly an intended mock execution. And they grabbed me, stood me up again, and took me to the next place to get interrogated. Now, my guess was that was intended to make me a little more forthcoming with information. It didn't really help them that much, but I'm guessing that was their intention. And if you read the books about being a prisoner of war, you discover that almost everybody is subjected to a mock execution by the first group of people who catch them. First of all, I had not read those books by then. And I've had a lot more time to reflect since then. And two is, you truly don't know it's a mock execution until you survive it. It's really the real thing until then. And so I would have to say that was the single most anxiety-provoking event that occurred while I was a captive. So they finally eventually got around to taking me to some guy who could say, make a decision. And he said, take them to prison, me and Sergeant Dunlap. So they did. They threw us in the back of a truck, and they took us to prison. And prison was in Basra, and it was just like it shows on TV. It's about a 12-foot cell and a big door with a deadbolt on the wrong side, and little windows you couldn't possibly get out even if you didn't have broken arms. And they sit me down there, and there I sit. And I'm taking stock. I'm a doctor, I'm taking stock, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm feeling really nauseated and really weak, and so why is that? I'm looking around, and I do not see that I was shot, because that happened in the back. So the fact that my entire flight suit is drenched, I just thought I was laying in mud. As it turns out, when they got it off me and I looked down, it was all blood, but I didn't know that. And so I think, so why am I feeling so bad? I thought, well, I must have some kind of, fractured kidney, fractured liver, fractured spleen, something. And then I took great comfort in the fact that, as I'm sure you all know, the body conserves itself, and so it'll conserve the brain, the heart, and then the kidneys. So I said, well, I must have enough blood to make it to the brain and the heart, because I know it's making it to the kidneys, because I have got to pee. Now, you're in a flight suit. You have 2 broken arms. You can't even stand up by yourself, and you are in this outfit that is one piece and zips up the front. Now, think about how you're going to get out of that so that you can go use the water closet. It's hopeless, absolutely hopeless. And so recognizing that and coming up with a plan is the important thing. So I yell, and a guard comes in, and he comes in with his gun, and he looks at me, and I say what I hope is the one thing he knows, which is water closet. He nods, water closet, water closet. And then he stands me up. He grabs me by the shirt, stands me up, like we're gonna go. And then I look down, and he looks down, I said, then he sees the problem. He does nothing, he leaves. I think that is not helping me. So he comes back in with one of his buds, 2 guys with 2 guns. They look at me, water closet. I look down, they leave. I'm thinking, how hard can this be, you know? So the third guy, 3 guys, now it's 2 guys with guns and 1 guy with a huge knife. And so he comes in with one of the blue robes that everybody there wears, and they kind of roll it up and they put it over my head, and then they cut off the flight suit as they unroll the thing. They're very worried about my modesty. You know, I got to tell you, I might have worried about that too if I didn't have to pee quite so bad. So my message to there is, you know, when I got back to the States, people talk about how difficult it is to reorient your thinking. I can assure you, I did not have to find strangers to tell me to help me take my clothes off. It's not that hard to get back to your normal life, but you do have to learn to do what's necessary where you are. There's actually a message there. So we accomplished that mission, and I'm sitting on my bench now in my blue costume, and stayed there till the next day. I heard them beating up on Dunlap in the next cell. There was nothing I could do about it, but I did hear a lot of thudding. And as it turns out, I think he did it purposefully. I think he felt guilty that he really wasn't injured in any way. He didn't have a broken bone, didn't he? As far as I could tell, looking at him, he didn't have a bruise. And so when they asked him why he came to Iraq, and when they asked me that, I said I was ordered to Iraq. When they asked him, apparently he said, I came to kill Saddam Hussein. Now that just tells you about wisdom. That if you're a 20-year-old guy in the infantry, that maybe you need a little more neuroplasticity to get to wisdom. And so I probably wouldn't have said that. So maybe it was education, maybe, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just he felt guilty, he wasn't beat up, and he wanted to look as bad as I looked. It worked. You know, he did look pretty bad after that. So the next day they took us to some place. They said it was a reserve center. I have no idea where it was. And there we had the good cop, bad cop thing. You know, some older gentleman in a uniform says, you know, you guys have knocked out all of our electricity, all of our phones, all of our this and that, but we could make a movie and send it to your families. And we said, no, thank you. So we stayed a day there, and then they loaded us up on a bus and took us to Baghdad. Now, you blindfolded and tied. No, I wasn't tied up every place I go because I had 2 stupid broken arms, but they tied up, you know, Dunlap. And but they did blindfold both of us, and so I'm getting on the bus, and of course, you know, the good thing about a nose like mine is they blindfold you, and you put your head back, and you see right under it, and you know, so I look out the window, and at Baghdad 300 kilometers, Baghdad 200 kilometers, you know, I know we're going to Baghdad. But as I'm getting on the bus, in the aisle, I do see in front of me a foot, and I follow that foot, and it's got a cast on that leg, and it's Captain Bill Andrews, the guy I went to get. So at least they hadn't shot him either. I was hoping he'd gotten away, but there he was. And so I said, well, we've got the guy. We're just not going the right way yet. But I did have pretty much confidence we've made it this far. Now, my new mission, you know, being able to go with plan B. We talk in the Army, we make plans. We plan for hours and days and weeks and months and years. But one of the great sayings they have is that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And so that's how I felt. Okay, so we're going to plan B. My plan originally was go get this guy, you know, we're going to stop, I'm going to land, I'm going to put a splint in his leg, I'm going to put him on the stretcher, we're going to put him back in my helicopter, we're going to walk home, I'm going to feel like a hero. That didn't work out all that well. So now we got him. We just have to stay alive until they come get us. I felt very confident. I had absolute faith that we were running the war differently. It was a different era, it was a different generation, it was a bunch of different people with different, it wasn't Vietnam. You know, they are going to come get me. If my job is to stay alive until they have a chance to come get me, and to keep all these guys that are now with me alive as well. So the ability to change mission in midstream because you have to, I think, is a good talent or capability and something you should learn. So we get to Baghdad, and by this time, by the way, the third guy who had survived our wreck had shown up. He'd shown up on a stretcher because he had a fractured pelvis and a busted femur. And so they took me and him, Sergeant Stamaras, to the Rashid Military Hospital. And they took the other 2 guys who really weren't injured to the regular prison. And there, I am convinced we got the best medical care that was available in the entire country by then. I was blessed. I had an English-speaking, UK-educated, well-published orthopedic surgeon who was the commander of the hospital. In fact, the truth is we've since helped him emigrate to America, but that took 25 years. But at the time, he was a 1-star general in the Iraq Air Force, very, very professional. But when he did the x-rays of Sergeant Stamaras, by this time I had told him I was a doctor, And he said, would you please go talk to him about what I'm going to do, which was going to put external fixators on, which was the right thing to do. He says, because I think he'll have more confidence if you tell him what we're doing. So the guy was really professional and really helpful. But it is odd, I will tell you, to be in a hospital where you got the surgeon and you got the resident, you got the nurse, you got the medical student, and just like in America, or most places where you're from here, but they're doing it by kerosene lantern because there's no electricity in this hospital. And so having somebody put you to sleep in a place that's running on one lonely generator, and there's no backup, so if this thing stops, you're going to stop breathing, you're going to be dead again. That's not all that comforting. So there it was, but they did. So after they operated on Stamaris, then they operated on me, and they put me to sleep and put my arms in casts so that they were kind of arm-shaped again. And so after that, it was a lot less uncomfortable. So I started doing, PT in my room. I thought, well, I got to do something. I don't know how long this is going to take for them to get me out of here. As it turns out, they were already doing negotiations for they had 80,000 Iraqi prisoners. They had 26 of us. So a few days went by, and they took us to they loaded us up another bus. This time took us to the prison, and then put us in our yellow POW costumes that many of you might have seen on TV. And then, if you were old enough to have TV back then. And then so we went to and that was with the Red Cross. So the Red Cross gets us in the lobby, unties us, takes our blindfolds off, and says, you're safe with the Red Cross, but we can't fly out today because the weather's too bad. So we said, fine. And they were very nice. I'll never forget these guys. They said, but we have generators, and we have got hot water and a private room for each of you. And we looked at them and said, we have each had a quote-unquote private room for between 1 and 6 weeks. And that would be solitary confinement. And so we had what I would have to only describe as an adult slumber party. We probably, there were 26 of us, we had about 3 rooms that we actually used, and we just told stories. It was probably the most therapeutic thing anybody could have ever done. Being in a safe environment with a shared experience of people of a like experience, as opposed to people who look at you like you are from Mars. Like your family's gonna look at you when you get back. So I will just say that was, I don't think it was intended by anyone, but it really was helpful. So we told stories all night, and we flew back home the next day. And we flew back to Riyadh. And so I get pictures again. And everybody thinks I'm short now. I've always wondered why they thought I was short till I looked at this picture. And I'm on like the 5th step, actually. So that is General Schwarzkopf. He's like 6'5". And I am telling him that I normally salute 4-star generals, but I'm sorry, sir. And he told me that was okay. So we flew to Riyadh, and then we flew from Riyadh to Bahrain, and then we got on the hospital ship, the Mercy, and that's where they did some physical exams and debriefings and stuff. And there's the guy I went to get. Now, the truth is, I didn't know this guy from Adam. I knew his name because somebody told me on the radio who he was. And then when I got on the bus, I followed it, and there was his name on his shirt, Captain Bill Andrews. But as it turns out, he's a classmate from college from my husband. And he is the most highly decorated Air Force pilot of that war. Not for getting shot down, there's no particular glory in that, but for having previously led a mission where they prevented a bunch of Special Forces guys from getting overrun. So I guess the message is that you take loyalty, you say you have it, and you say you will never leave a fallen comrade, and you say all those things, you have to actually mean it. So what came out of all of that? So that, there was an 8-day misadventure. And then it took a couple more weeks and months, to have a couple things of surgery and do some rehab. And, because I got to get the arm fixed. And then once the arms are fixed, I get the leg fixed. Then I finally went back to work. So for me, what came out of it? Well, I knew right away that I was a better leader, a better parent, a better doctor, because I now had a lot more empathy for people who were injured. I'd always previously been incredibly healthy. Now, I didn't call it post-traumatic growth then. I don't think in '91 they had made up the word, but that's obviously what I was experiencing. So I just said, I'm a better person. The next year, I really had the opportunity, because of this experience, I didn't feel any different about women or about equal opportunity or about education or about anything that I had ever had, but no one had ever bothered to ask what I thought. And all of a sudden, I was like an expert. So, well, if they're going to ask me, I'm going to tell them. So I, because of my testimony about, you might notice that I was shot down and captured and got back, and I'm doing really quite well. And so you can't use that as an excuse to prevent women from having equal opportunity. And so they repealed the law the next year that prevented women from flying combat aircraft. And then from 1993 to 2000, I was really busy and I didn't really think about it much at all, to tell you the truth. And then in 2008, I did have the opportunity to reflect about this experience a lot more because I got to run Comprehensive Soldier Fitness, and I'm sure I would never have gotten picked if I hadn't demonstrated some of those resilient thinking skills we needed to embed in people. And then since then, I left the Army in 2012, and since then I've had the opportunity to help other people, whether it's the Air Force, which we did their training in 2013, and we've worked pretty closely with the SAMRI in the state of South Australia to embed this in a whole network of their entire state, replicating really what we're doing in the what we did in the Army. So none of those things would have happened. But people would ask me, so what came out of that experience? And what they were expecting to hear, I heard it very clear, they were expecting to hear all this baggage I was carrying around with me. And so then they would be very specific. They would say, so what's worse about you? You know, they asked my husband, he said, she's the same. They asked my daughter, she said, she's the same. And so they were very specific. What's worse about you? He said, well, I can't do as many push-ups as I could before. You know, I used to be able to do like 100 in 2 minutes. Now I can only do 60. So, and it hurts more. There was no question, it hurt more, but, you know, okay, that's a pretty small price to pay, I decided. But that's what people were expecting. But so for me, I went back to my life. You know, I mean, I came back from the Gulf, and I went back and I showed my dogs, and I went back and I did operations, and I ran a big hospital. I did a bunch of critical care transporting of people from Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, 33 different countries worth of people came through Landstuhl. So, and then I'm running a farm, and I went back to life. I didn't really think about it very much. People asked me, how did you make it? And I thought they were kidding. I really did. And I thought that only because I looked at that question through my lens, and my lens says, well, it never crossed my mind to do anything else. And then I realized, but they really mean it. I mean, because it kept for years. And finally, somebody said to me, but I don't think I would have made it. Now that was like an aha moment for me, because I realized they're serious. They really don't think that. And how bad would it be to go through my life? I mean, by this time I was, you know, had done a lot of things. And I would not have done half of them if I had had that thought, that if something adverse happens, I will not make it. I would have, because if you think like that, you're going to avoid any risk. You're just going to do the safe, boring thing. And with fear all the time that you're going to fail, and I won't make it if I fail. That would be a horrible way to go through life. And I realized that they're not kidding. They really believed they wouldn't make it. And I think, then I felt responsible, okay? So I got back to, it was no big deal, really. So what is it that allowed me to do that? Because whatever it was, we need to give other people some more of it. And so, why did I do so well? Well, it's because I had long ago, when I was a little kid, and here are some of the, and so, you know, grade school, junior high school, these are the things that I internalized all along. A couple of them are really, really important. The first one is you can do anything. My dad told me that from the time I can remember. There are worse things than dying. There's living with dishonor. That was my grandfather. He was not only an Indian, a Cherokee, but he was a Marine in World War II at Iwo Jima, and he really internalized that, and he made sure everybody around him knew that. The truly great men in history are those who can turn a disadvantage into an advantage. I read that. I would have sold 1 million copies of that book for that guy if I could remember either the name or his name. So if anybody can find it, they should, because it was a moderate story. I mean, it was a guy who was a teenage boy whose mother had a baby, and he got stuck babysitting. So I remember distinctly, he's looking down at the crib at little Andrew, and he says, Andrew, the great men in history are those who can turn a disadvantage into an advantage, and I'm going to find a way to turn you into an advantage. So really those are, and the last one, Colonel Rosenthal was a general surgeon from Lebanon who had come to America, was in the Army, was a very senior colonel in the Army. And I was a medical student. I was giving this spiel. I was presenting a patient, and the patient had a big abdominal mass. And I wanted to do a biopsy of this thing, see what it was before I articulated a plan. So I'm saying this. I said, I'm talking to the staff and the other residents and the medical students, and I say, well, I want to do a percutaneous liver biopsy, but I would be afraid that, and that's as far as I got. Dr. Rosenthal looks at me and he says, oh, Dr. Cornum. And I love this man, but Dr. Cornum, you are a general surgeon now. You are never afraid. And that was really helpful because I realized from that, fear never helps you. If you're in surgery, if fear limits your options, it doesn't make you see all the options, you hyperventilate, you shake, that never helps you when you're operating. It sort of paralyzes you in inactivity. And if you've got somebody in the operating room and you have it may have been a mistake. You may have put a hole in the vena cava. And if you just say, oh dear Lord, what shall I do? I'm afraid he's going to bleed out. There is no doubt he is going to bleed out. That bleeding is audible. I mean, you can hear it in the next operating room. So if you don't act on all what you've learned right away, you take your 2 punch sticks, you put them on both sides of the hole, you rapidly sew it up, you infuse fluid like mad. But if you don't do those things, the guy will die right in front of you. I mean, you won't even, it'll be amazing. And so fear never helps you. And I don't think, since Dr. Rosenthal told me that, I have ever said that word because I think words matter. Now, I have said I've been in some anxiety-provoking experiences. I've rolled 2 trucks. I had a stuck throttle on an airplane. I did have my helicopter wreck. I mean, I've had I've fallen off horses in horse races. I mean, I've had a few anxiety-provoking activities, but I don't remember fear. I remember planning. I remember changing the plan. I remember a lot of things, but fear is never helpful, and telling people to be afraid is never helpful. So that's why I did well. That was my reflection. Now, because I didn't have any other language. I certainly had never heard of positive psychology. I don't think that word had been invented either by the time people were asking me this stuff. Because remember, I was really busy, and so I didn't really think about it except for to reflect about those things for a long time. But then I'm the Assistant Surgeon General, and it's 2008, and we are faced with this. And none of it's good news. I mean, every day there's a new bad news story about the Army and psychological health. And it's not just the Army, it's around the globe. There's bad news about psychological health, and it's never getting better. We're spending more and more every day, and every day more and more people are doing worse. That's not a recipe for success. So like I said, I had the opportunity to be the acting Surgeon General often because I went to these meetings with the chief and the real Surgeon General wasn't there. And so the chief of staff, it was just perfect. He says, one day, he leans over and says, Rhonda, we have got to do something different than we're doing besides finding and treating more people with disease. I said, yes, sir, we do. And he says, what should we do? And I said, well, sir, here's what we should do. Because by this time I had thought about it. Now, we should stop doing this. We should stop celebrating dysfunction. We should stop giving people the idea that they're all going to do badly. Because it never helps, The people who have those things at the top, they know they have it, and the people who don't care. So what good does it do? So we found out, and somebody did a study, found out that 95% of the students at West Point, the premier military academy, believed that they were likely or very likely to get post-traumatic stress disorder if they were deployed to the war. And yet only 7% had even ever heard of post-traumatic growth, when in fact, about 7.5% of the people who come out of West Point will get post-traumatic stress disorder if they deploy to the war, and most of them, if given an opportunity, will endorse some finding of post-traumatic growth. So we're just giving them the expectation of failure. Now, why is that helpful? I would never start a horse race planning I was a steeplechase jockey in my younger life, planning to have a wreck on the 4th fence. If I really thought that was what was going to happen, I would not go to the starting line. So I didn't. I knew it was a possibility, but I didn't dwell on that possibility. I dwelled on the fact that my horse is in really good shape, I'm in really good shape, I'm really a good rider, and I have really good equipment, and this is really fun. And I might fall off at the 4th fence, that's true. But I don't plan it. So I don't aim low. So So back to what were people thinking? So why did I really make it through? Here's really why I made it through. It's because I was physically fit, I was emotionally fit, I had a lot of self-regulation, I had socially fit, I didn't have these lingering feelings of guilt and, oh my goodness, why did I leave after screaming at my spouse or not visiting my mother, or the other things people do. And the spiritual fitness, I really had. The Army, I really felt like we had the white hats. And so it was worth it. So those are all comforting things and all pretty likely to help you be successful. So we built a model on why we need to help people get more of these things. That was the whole idea. And luckily, there's a lot of data that sort of corroborates this stuff. So this was a study. One of the good things about being a prisoner of war, there aren't too many good things about that, but one of the good ones is you get to meet a lot of really interesting people who also were prisoners of war. And I've met hundreds of them from Vietnam. And we've been following these guys since they got back in the 70s. And so they took all of the ones who had no psychopathology. They weren't depressed, did not now and had never had depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, spouse abuse. They were really doing well, had started businesses, doing really well, gone back to be generals, etc. And then there was the guys who weren't doing so well. And here's the things that were different about them. Now, once again, the enemy has a vote, and so you can't help what rank you are when they capture you, because, as they're shooting at you, you really can't tell. He can't tell whether you're a major or you're a private. You can't help your age. You can't help how long they put you in solitary confinement. You can't help any of those things except how much optimistic thinking you know how to do. Now, how many people here know CPR? How many people here learned it while somebody was having a heart attack in front of them? Essentially no one, right? Right. So why is it, do you suppose, that we had these models that we would give people training in education in better thinking skills and better coping immediately before a crisis, or even worse, after it? Makes no sense. You need to learn these things to include optimistic thinking when you have time to practice, when you have the leisure to try a few things out, when if it doesn't work, you can try again. It's just kind of like we would never send a guy to the war and figure out he's going to learn how to sight and load his weapon while someone is shooting at him. We would never do that. We have a very deliberate training program. You'll learn how to take it apart. You'll learn how to zero it. You'll learn how to fire it while you're stationary and the target's stationary. You'll learn how to fire it while you're stationary and the target's moving. It's a very deliberate, progressive training program. So why did we not do that in our psychological fitness? Because almost everybody admits that values and it's the psychology that makes people either get their weapon out or just lie down and die. Sun Tzu said that, a couple thousand years ago. MacArthur, everybody says it, So here's what we needed to do. We needed to treat psychological fitness and health like we did physical fitness and health. Now, when somebody's sick or injured, at the top thing, physical fitness. If you're sick or injured, we have doctors and nurses and rehab facilities and things to take care of you. But the vast majority of people are not sick or injured at a given time, but they're also not optimally fit. So the Army, for 200 years, has had a training program to take care of those people, to trying to move them to the right, trying to make them more physically fit, thinner, faster, stronger, more endurance, etc. Now, in psychological fitness, the bottom thing, we didn't have a program at all for those people in the middle. All we did was we poured billions of dollars into the guys on the left. We had rehab, and we had mental health services, and we had drug abuse problems. And I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of those people. We absolutely must. But you can't assume that everybody else, the other 95% of the Army, is optimally healthy. First of all, it's not true, and secondly, it's not helpful. So we needed a program to move those people to the right, make them better able to communicate, make better decisions, better self-regulation, practice more gratitude, all the things that you all know how to do. Okay, and so it is a values-based organization. LDRSHIP, that's leadership, by the way, and everybody has internalized those things to one extent or the other. Not everybody's a hero, but at least everybody wears them on their dog tags and everybody can repeat them, and the people who stay have pretty much internalized those things. And so, there's nothing about being able to do push-ups in that list, but those are the things that we really think are important. And so we needed a training program to help people maintain those values. So Now, I got to say, you need a little sex appeal, because you got to appeal to people to want to do something. Now, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I aspire not to be depressed. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I aspire not to be a drunk. Maybe a few people do that, but most people don't. Most people wake up and they go to work and they put on their PT costume and they say, I want to be more fit. So we have this little mantra. We want people who are more physically fit, mentally tough, emotionally strong. Who would not want to be like that? That appeals to everybody, whether they're already physically fit, whether they're already, they're like me. I want to be more of those things, and I figured I had a pretty fair helping of most of that. And so we wanted something that would appeal to everybody, because everybody can get better. Now, some people have more distance to go, and it's, you can improve a little bit and you've made a large leap for you, but everybody can get better. And so we wanted a program that would appeal to everyone. And so we designed an assessment that was strengths-based that would appeal to everyone, because you would take it and then you could see yourself improve, and it was not asking you about symptoms, because symptoms-based things, you either have them or you don't. But if you don't have them, it doesn't mean you're optimally fit. It just means you're not sick. It's kind of like your blood pressure, If your blood pressure is if the borderline pathology is 130 over 90, and yours is 125 over 85, well, you don't have pathology, but you're not optimally fit either. So you should be aiming at, 95 over 60. But if all you do is ask, do they have high blood pressure or not, then you give people no credit for doing better than bad. That's not a way to make, I think Dr. Ben-Shahar said that pretty well yesterday. We should not be celebrating mediocrity. We should be celebrating excellence. And so when you did the global assessment tool, which everybody was required to do, you got back a little thing and said how you were doing from 0 to 5, and then it gave you a little algorithmically derived paragraph about how good you were doing, what you could do to even improve. And then you could, if the spirit moved you, you compare yourself with other people of the same rank or the same battalion or the same gender or whatever you wanted to do, whether they had or had not deployed. And so, you could either feel good or bad about yourself, but you could at least know where you stood, because everybody knows to the half a degree how they stand in the physical fitness room. And we all know that. He got a 289, a max is 300, or he got a 386 on the extended scale. Everybody knows where they are in physical fitness. So it made perfect sense and was just in keeping with our main culture to want to do this. But since no one else saw the results, pretty much everybody was honest, because there's no sense in lying to yourself. So that's what we did. And then we had, here was the original distribution of global assessment scores. We did, like close to 1 million people, and found that most people were kind of in the middle. It's a fairly good looking curve. There are some people who are really floundering, though. And these are not people, if you were in the hospital or arrested, you didn't take the thing. So these are all people in the active force. And then we always believed, in the Army, if you care, you measure, and you measure if it matters. So this is how many people took it every year. So we didn't really have a lot of sampling error, because it's essentially everybody in the Army. And the lower level in 2011 is because if you were deployed, you didn't have to take it, and we had an awful lot of people deployed in 2011. So, and here are the things, and at the same time, so we had an assessment, and then we developed, based on the Penn Resilience Program, and based on a number of other experts, and I will mention a few of them, and if I leave anybody out who's here, I really feel bad. But we had the Gottmans and Bart Fredrickson and John Cassioppo and let's see, it's all I can think of right now, and the Penn program to develop our training. So we had pretty good confidence that we had an evidence-based program, and they endorsed it, so we felt pretty good about that. And so we then had a train-the-trainer program, just like you would expect. And so we can't deploy an army of psychologists. We deployed an army of people who were already there. We deployed sergeants and first-line supervisors. We gave them training in these resilient thinking skills, and then sent them out, and their mission was to train the people in their organizations. At the same time, we had a huge strategic communication plan to make sure that this was accepted from the private to the 4-star generals. And once again, the requirement was we had the Chief of Staff of the Army back in this. But I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill selling this to the Mental Health Caucus and the Senate Armed Services Committee. And you have to have a plan so that everybody gets it at once, or else you'll have a bunch of people who will just take pot shots at you. And so we did this training, and since you can't deploy it to everybody all the time, we looked at the people who had it compared to the people who didn't, and we had done them in brigades, so you could look at a whole brigade at a time. We found out that people who had the training, these are subjective things, obviously. These are people on their repeat GATs. So what improved when we repeated them? These are the things that improved. But because we had at the same time put together a fairly complex software application that blended our global assessment tool scores with things like deployment, promotion, drug tests, positive or negative, times being arrested. I mean, all positive and negative things that the Army measures, because we measure a million things. There are other things that we saw that were improved. So if you had the training and before you deployed, when you came back, you were less likely to have a substance abuse disorder diagnosis, and you were less likely to have any mental health diagnosis in the first, because we assess people immediately upon return, 90 days, 180 days. I mean, everybody's got survey fatigue in the Army, I admit. So we found out that, yeah, the training does work. And then the people who had, the trainers, the guys we deployed out, they were really quite different than their age, rank, and occupational specialty and deployment matched peers. Now, the reason this is important is because if you call those people, instead of being sergeants in the Army, you think about them as teachers in your schools or nurses in your hospitals, would you prefer that they have less likelihood of being drug users, less likelihood of stealing, less likelihood of any number of negative actions? So the master resilience trainers really are likely to be a better influence after having had the training. Okay. Well, at the end of this whole saga, when it's still ongoing, I found out that in the state of South Australia, that Marty Seligman had spent, I think, 3 months over 3 years helping them develop a plan to become the state of well-being, and wrote this monograph. And we realized that what they were trying to do was awfully much like what the Army had done. Now, the Army is 1.3 million people, if you count the active duty force and the reserves and the Guard. And the state of South Australia is 1.3 million people. The Army, however, is really 2.5 times that big, because that's only soldiers. That doesn't account wives, husbands, and children. So it's really a lot of people. And if we could do this, then we could help them, we thought, bring this whole project to scale. And what we've learned is that it's not that different in a democracy versus the military. What George Casey said to me, he says, Rhonda, you're right, I can tell people to do something. That doesn't mean they will do it. And it also doesn't mean they will internalize it. You have really got to sell it. And that's the same in a democracy as it is in the Army. So I just want to terminate this. I think that leaves me 4 minutes to answer questions if there are any. That positive psychology really is a great thing, the study of what makes life better. Because we got piles of people figuring out how to make it worse. I don't know anybody who gets up, I want to make my life worse today. I know how to do that. So I don't find that all that rewarding. Now, I was a biochemist. I wasn't a psychologist. But having studied it up there, then next we got to do it. We really owe it to people to do it. Now, I wish I didn't have to do this in the Army. I wish every kid who joined the Army came with all of the self-regulation and the ability to step back and reflect, and the ability to find something good in everything they do. I wish they all came that way, but I got to tell you, having watched them get off the bus, they don't. And we measure the day they get there, so I know it's true. And I just want everybody to look at the bottom thing. You can study it to death, but that will not help. So I want everybody here to not just go back to their lab and their computers, but I want you to go talk to your school superintendents and the chief of police and all the other things, that other ways you could possibly be touching your society and your communities, and do it, not just study it. And I'm done. Thank you. Two minutes and 44 seconds for questions. One of the things they do teach you is to be really punctual. Yes, ma'am? What does the training actually entail? It's 2 weeks of training. The first one is we teach the sergeants or the first line supervisors, wherever they are, basically all of the skills. They've all been renamed because, the gratitude journal does not resonate very well with a combat vet, but hunt the good stuff resonates. So we spent a long time basically changing the vocabulary and changing the vignettes. Bambi doesn't cut it, Braveheart, we're good, Rambo kind of thing. But really, it's the same skills. It's really cognitive behavioral therapy skills taught preventively. All the ones you would think of, and a little mindfulness meditation, and you're amazed at how many people actually are happy to do that. The first is a week. The first 5 days, and then the next are days on how to teach it back. So you give them the skills first, and then the other thing that's really important is a lesson plan, and so to make sure that they know what to do when they get back to the unit, because they will do it, and they'll all go home and try it on their families, and they'll all think it's really good, and then they won't know what to do. So we did a lot of things. We did ALARACs, they're called, all Army actions, and FRAGOs, fragmentary orders, to make sure. So, and we realized this because we were training all these guys, and they were doing nothing. And they admitted it. They didn't know what to do. So then we had very specific lesson plans on what you should do immediately upon getting back to your unit, what you need to do the first month, what you need to do every month, and that's when it really got traction.
Is that available to read anymore?
There are certainly technical reports about what we did, DTIC, Defense Technical something or other. And I don't remember it offhand, but if you just Google DTIC and CSF, you'll get it. Yes, sir.
First of all, I'm so inspired by your story, and I'm wondering, do you have any early influences that made you so keen to focus on the silver lining, even if
No, other than I think my grandparents. I remember my grandmother and my father, and I do have siblings and stuff, but I don't remember them saying it. They were a lot younger. They weren't saying much. Telling me often, but this time they were sort of lower middle class. Telling me often they used to be really poor, but they didn't know it, and so they were focusing on good family relations and doing well in school, and they just chose not to focus on the fact that, they lived in a one-room shack. Ma'am?
Did this training generalize to their lives?
Oh, I think no doubt. There's absolutely nothing military specific about this training. This training, and I say this all the time because, once again, my left-leaning colleagues were really hateful about it. They said, you're just making people who don't care about, I said, no. We're just making better people, and we believe that better people will make better soldiers. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well, the media is hard on it because the media looks for anything negative in anything. If you listen to the last panel before lunch, you might have gotten a little flavor of that. It's very easy, and for some reason, societally, and I think perhaps it's worse in America than other places, but maybe that's just because I haven't lived enough other places, for whatever reason, and they can always find people, they can find quote-unquote experts who will help them poke holes. Now it's much easier to poke holes than it is to do research. So that's what they do to get attention. That is absolutely what I believe.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.